I am standing in the doorway of apartment 4C at the Caldwell Arms building in Portland, Oregon, with a key in my hand that I have used once a month for 26 years. The room looks exactly the way it did on the night of March 14, 1999. The furniture has not moved. The curtains are the same ones Catherine picked out from a Sunday market in 1997 because she said the color reminded her of late summer. The stain on the carpet near the kitchen entrance is still there. I stopped seeing it as a stain a long time ago. I see it the way you see a scar on your own hand, not with horror anymore, just with the steady, permanent knowledge of how it got there. Most people who knew what I was doing thought I had lost my mind. My sister said it gently and repeatedly for about 10 years before she gave up saying it and simply accepted it as a feature of who I had become. My therapist, a patient man named Dr. Aldous Webb, spent 3 years trying to redirect me toward something he called forward motion. My colleagues at Jefferson High School, where I taught biology, assumed I was a man who had never healed and possibly never would. None of them were wrong, exactly. They just did not know what I knew. I was a science teacher. I read the journals. I understood what was coming. My name is Robin Farrell. I am 61 years old. I paid $145,000 in rent on an apartment I never slept in, never cooked in, never lived in for a single night, because inside it was evidence that the technology of 1999 could not read, but that I absolutely believed, the technology of the future would. Last October, a detective named Felicity Drum called me at 7 in the morning. She had 4 words for me. I am going to tell you everything. Before the apartment and the key and the 26 years of waiting, there was Catherine. I met her in a community college chemistry class in the fall of 1993. I was 24 and she came in late on the first day of the semester, slightly out of breath, carrying too many books, and sat down next to me because it was the only available seat. She looked at the board, looked at her notebook, looked at me, and said in a voice just below a whisper, "Please tell me we haven't covered anything important yet." We had not. That was the beginning. Her full name was Catherine Osei. She was funny the way certain people are funny. Not performing it, just producing it, dry and sudden and gone before you had fully registered it. She was a biology major who had transferred from a school in Eugene and who had opinions about cellular respiration that she was not shy about sharing. We studied together, then ate together, then somewhere in the first semester crossed the invisible line from people who knew each other into people who needed to. We dated for 2 years. We married in the summer of 1996 in a small ceremony in her parents' backyard in Eugene with 40 people and a borrowed tent and a cake that leaned slightly to the left and tasted extraordinary. We moved into apartment 4C at the Caldwell Arms in Portland in early 1997 because the rent was manageable on 2 modest salaries and because Catherine stood in the living room during the viewing and tilted her face toward the window and said the light in the mornings was something she could live inside. We were trying for a child. We had been trying for 8 months when she died. She was 34 years old. I want you to hold that for a moment before we go any further. 34 years old. 8 months of hoping for something that was just beginning to feel possible. A woman who noticed the quality of morning light when she walked into a room. That is who was taken. March 14th, 1999. I was in Seattle for a 3-day teachers' conference. I had left the morning of the 13th and was due back on the 15th. I tell this part of the story the way I have told it in my own head thousands of times. In pieces, with the sensory details that never faded and the logical connective tissue that still does not feel entirely real. The smell of the hotel conference room carpet. The particular quality of Pacific Northwest rain against a window on an upper floor. The moment my phone rang at 6:48 in the evening, and I saw a number I recognized as belonging to our neighbor, a woman named Winifred Bale, who had lived in 4B for years and who had never once called me before that evening. She had heard something. She had gone to check. The door was unlocked. I drove back from Seattle. I do not remember most of the drive. I remember arriving at the Caldwell Arms at 11:15 p.m. and seeing the police tape and understanding, in the way the body understands things before the mind has finished processing them, that the specific life I had been living was over. The lead detective was a man named Gideon Marsh. He was thorough and decent and ultimately unable to solve what he had been given. He told me that night, and again 2 days later in a formal meeting, that the apartment showed no signs of forced entry. Nothing had been taken. There was no apparent motive. The forensics team had collected samples from the scene: a partial bloody footprint near the kitchen, a a smear on the inside of the window frame that faced the back alley. But the DNA technology available in 1999 was limited, and what they had recovered was too degraded to produce a usable profile. There were no suspects. There were no strong leads. There was nothing except the fact that Catherine was gone, and the person who had taken her had walked out of our apartment and back into ordinary life without leaving anything behind that 1999 could read. I want to be fair to Gideon Marsh. He worked the case for 2 full years with what I believe was genuine effort. He interviewed neighbors, questioned Catherine's co-workers, and investigated me with the thoroughness that spouses always receive in these situations, which I understood and did not resent. He chased every available thread. They all ran out. By 2001, the case was officially listed as inactive. Marsh retired in 2004. A different detective took a second look in 2009, called me twice, and ran out of threads in the same places Marsh had. A third review in 2014 produced a single new interview and nothing else. I attended every meeting that was offered to me. I filed information requests every 18 months asking that the case be reconsidered in light of whatever new forensic technologies had become available. I kept a file of every letter I sent and every response I received, which ranged from sympathetic to bureaucratic to, in several cases, no response at all. I also kept reading the journals. The science of DNA analysis was moving. It was always moving. Every year the sensitivity improved, the database expanded, the methodologies refined. What could not be read in 1999 might be readable in 2005. What 2005 could not read might yield to 2010. I tracked the field the way a navigator tracks the horizon, not expecting to arrive immediately, just staying oriented toward where the destination was. I was a science teacher. I knew what the trajectory looked like. I knew what patients inside that trajectory looked like. I just needed the evidence to still be there when the technology arrived. The lease on apartment 4C came up for renewal in March of 2001, 2 years to the month after Catherine died. My landlord was a man named Arlo Fitch, 60 years old, who had owned the Caldwell Arms for 20 years, and who had the gentle, unhurried manner of someone who had seen enough of life to have stopped being surprised by most of it. He sat down with me in the building lobby with 2 cups of coffee and said, without pressure, that he understood if I needed to let the apartment go, and that he wanted me to know there was no hard feeling either way. My sister Priya had been saying the same thing for months. So had Dr. Webb. So had friends, colleagues, and one well-meaning pastor who had known Catherine's family in Eugene and written me a long letter about the particular grace of release. I sat in apartment 4C alone the night before the deadline. I had not changed a single thing since the police had released the scene. The stain was there. The window was there. The footprint had been photographed and sampled and returned to where it had always been. I sat in the middle of the room and thought about what I knew. The evidence on that floor and that window frame was the only physical connection between Catherine's killer and what had been done. If I walked away, the building would clean the apartment, repaint the walls, replace the carpet, and 26 years of advancing science would arrive at an empty room with nothing left to read. I signed the renewal. I told Arlo I needed the apartment kept exactly as it was. No cleaning, no repairs, climate controlled to prevent further degradation of biological material. I told him why. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he had a daughter Catherine's age. He said he understood. He honored that agreement without complaint for every year that followed until the day he handed the building management to his daughter Simone in 2019. Here is what 26 years of carrying something like this actually looks like from the inside. You teach. You grade papers. You coached the junior debate team for 11 years because a student you liked in 2003 asked you to, and you realized it gave Tuesday and Thursday afternoons a shape that helped. You move into a smaller apartment 6 blocks from the Caldwell Arms because you need to be close but you cannot be inside it every day. You pay $475 a month in 2001, and you watch that number climb every few years as Portland's rental market does what Portland's rental market does, until you are paying $890 a month in 2025, and the total has crossed $145,000 without you ever spending a night in the room. You visit on the 14th of every month. Always alone. You check the condition of the evidence. You make sure the climate control is maintaining the temperature and humidity levels you have specified. You stand in the room for a while and you remember, and then you leave and you lock the door and you go back to your ordinary life. You wear your wedding ring at 51, and your students occasionally ask about it with the careful curiosity of teenagers who are not sure if the question is appropriate. And you tell them you were married, and that your wife passed, and you leave it at that. You go on 2 dates in 26 years. Both end when the women involved find out about the apartment. Not because they are cruel, but because they are reasonable, and what I was doing did not look like healing to a reasonable person. I did not blame them. What I was doing was not healing. It was something else. It was a promise I had made to Catherine in that room on the night before I signed the first renewal. Sitting alone on the floor with the stain beside me and the window above me, that I was not going to let the only physical evidence of what had happened to her be scrubbed away before the world was ready to read it. I kept that promise for 26 years. I kept it on the months when it felt purposeful and on the months when it felt like madness in equal measure. I kept it because I was a science teacher and I knew what the trajectory looked like, and I was not wrong. I need to tell you about Lured Vane. Not yet as the person she turned out to be, but as the person I knew, which is a different and in some ways harder thing to describe. She was in my friend group in 11th and 12th grade at Westbrook High School in Beaverton, Oregon. Smart, quiet, the kind of person who was always at the edge of a group photograph rather than the center of it. She was good at chemistry and bad at gym, and had a dry sense of humor that came out occasionally and surprised people when it did. I liked her in the uncomplicated way you like people you share a lunch table with for 2 years. In the spring of our senior year, she told me she had feelings for me. I remember the conversation. We were sitting on the bleachers after school on a Thursday. I was kind about it, I believe, though kindness in that kind of moment is always imperfect, because it is accompanied by a no, and no is what the other person hears regardless of how gently you say the rest. I told her I did not feel the same way. I told her I valued the friendship, and hoped it did not have to change things. She said it was fine. We remained in the same social circle through graduation. I went to college in Portland. She went somewhere I never confirmed. I did not think about her again in any serious way for 15 years. When Catherine died, the investigation interviewed people from our social circles, our workplaces, our families. Nobody raised Lured Vane's name. I did not raise it myself. It did not occur to me. Not once. That is the thing I have to carry alongside everything else. She was right there in my history the entire time, and I never saw it. In 2019, the Portland Police Department established a cold case unit specifically equipped with modern forensic technology and staffed by detectives trained in applying new DNA analysis methods to old evidence. I had been writing to the department every 2 years since 2003. When the unit was announced, I wrote again, this time with a complete summary of what I had preserved in Apartment 4C and why, with documentation going back to the original 1999 forensic report. Detective Felicity Drum called me 3 weeks later. She was direct and precise and did not waste words, which I appreciated immediately. She came to the Caldwell Arms, and I led her into Apartment 4C and watched her move through the room the way a person moves when they are taking serious inventory of something. She crouched near the stain. She examined the window frame. She asked me several specific questions about the climate control conditions I had maintained and the original forensic collection methods used in 1999. When she was done, she stood in the middle of the room and looked at me with an expression I had not seen on any face connected to this case before. Not sympathy, not skepticism, but something closer to professional respect. She told me she had never seen a private citizen maintain a crime scene at this level over this period of time. She told me she could not promise results. She told me Nadia's. I corrected her, Catherine's. Catherine's case was on the unit's active list. I went home and waited. I had gotten very good at waiting. The cold case unit came to Apartment 4C in the summer of 2025 with equipment that looked nothing like what Gideon Marsh's forensics team had brought in 1999. 2 days of work by a 4-person team. They used advanced touch DNA analysis and next-generation sequencing technology that could construct a complete genetic profile from biological material that the instruments of 1999 would have classified as unusable. They also had access to a familial DNA database search capability that had only become legally available in Oregon in 2021, which meant the profile they recovered could be checked not just against convicted criminals, but against a vastly larger pool of genetic records. The partial bloody footprint near the kitchen yielded a complete profile on the second day. The smear on the window frame confirmed it. Detective Drum called me when the samples were submitted to the database. She told me the analysis would take between 6 and 12 weeks. She told me to try to continue my normal routine. I taught my classes. I graded papers. I visited the apartment on the 14th of the month and stood in the room for the usual period of time. I did not tell anyone what was happening because I had learned over 26 years that hope, spoken aloud before it has resolved into something real, has a way of becoming its own kind of wound. I waited. October 3rd, 2025. A Friday. 7:12 in the morning. My phone rang. I was standing in my kitchen making coffee, and I saw Felicity Drum's name on the screen, and I put down the coffee and sat down before I answered, because I knew from some instinct built over 26 years of waiting that whatever she was about to say was going to require me to be sitting down to hear it. She said my name, just that first, and in the single syllable of it I heard that something had changed. The DNA profile matched a woman named Lord Vane, 51 years old, currently residing in Tucson, Arizona. Working as an office administrator for a medical supply company. No prior criminal record. Never a person of interest in any investigation connected to Catherine's death. She was in the database because of a minor traffic incident in Arizona in 2022. A routine cheek swab as part of a DUI screening that she had apparently considered insignificant. She had been driving around for 3 years with her DNA in a system that was simply waiting for the right question. I sat on the kitchen floor after the call ended. I did not plan to. My legs made the decision without consulting the rest of me. I sat there for a long time with my back against the cabinet and the unmade coffee on the counter above me and the morning light coming through the window, and I thought about a woman I had not thought about seriously in decades, who had been living an ordinary life in Arizona for 26 years while I had been standing in a room in Portland every 14th of the month making sure the floor did not change. Before the arrest, I did something I had not planned to do. I looked her up. I found her social media without difficulty. The profiles were active and carefully maintained in the cheerful, curated way of someone who has thought about what they want the world to see of them. There were photographs of weekend hikes in the Arizona desert, shots of food at restaurants, occasional posts about local community events she had attended. A LinkedIn profile with 23 years of steady employment history at 3 different companies. In every photograph, her face held the easy, relaxed expression of someone living without apparent weight. I looked at those photographs for a long time. What I felt was not rage. I had expected rage, and instead I found something colder, and in some ways harder to sit with, the recognition that she had simply continued. That while I had been teaching biology classes and visiting an unchanged room on the 14th of every month, and paying rent on an empty apartment, and wearing my wedding ring into my 50s, Lord Vane had been going on weekend hikes and eating at restaurants and posting photographs of sunsets in a state I had never been to. She had killed Catherine, and then she had kept living. For 26 years she had kept living without apparent difficulty and without, as far as I could see from the outside, any visible cost. I closed the laptop. I thought about Catherine saying the light in the mornings was something you could live inside. Then I called Felicity Drum and asked her when the arrest was scheduled. Lord Vane was arrested at her workplace in Tucson, Arizona, on October 9, 2025. Arizona officers coordinating with the Portland Cold Case Unit. I was not in Tucson. I had been asked if I wanted to be present, and I had known, when the question was asked, that I did not. What I needed was not to see her taken. What I needed was the phone call that told me it had happened. Felicity Drum called at 2:17 in the afternoon. Lord had been taken into custody without incident at approximately 1:45 p.m. She was cooperative in the sense that she had not resisted. She had asked for a lawyer immediately and said nothing beyond that. I was standing in the parking lot of Jefferson High School when I took the call, having just finished my afternoon classes. It was a mild October day. A few of my students were visible through a window in the building behind me. I thanked Felicity and hung up and stood in the parking lot for a while looking at nothing in particular. There is a version of this moment in movies and in certain kinds of stories where the protagonist feels something large and clean, triumph, release, vindication. I want to tell you honestly that what I felt was not large or clean. It was something quieter and more complicated. The pressure that releases when a thing you have held for a very long time is finally set down does not feel like triumph. It feels like the first full breath in a very long time. It feels like the particular exhaustion of a man who has been waiting so long that he had forgotten, in the day-to-day, that he was waiting at all. I got in my car. I drove home. I made the coffee I had abandoned that morning. During the investigation that followed the arrest, detectives recovered messages from an email account Lured had believed she deleted in 2001. The account had been archived on a server she had not known still existed. Digital forensics retrieved it intact. The messages were sent to a friend between late 1998 and early 1999. I was given summaries of the relevant content in a meeting with Felicity Drum at the Portland Police Department. I read them in a conference room with Felicity sitting across from me and a box of tissues on the table between us that I did not use. The messages confirmed everything the DNA had established and supplied what DNA alone cannot provide: intent and thought, and the specific geography of a mind that had carried something terrible for a long time before acting on it. She had tracked our routine. She had known that I traveled to Seattle for the conference every March. She had known when Catherine would be alone. She had entered through the back alley window she knew was sometimes unlocked because she had observed the building over a period of weeks. The motive was written in her own words from 2 decades ago, which made it both irrefutable and almost impossible to fully absorb. A high school rejection. 15 years of accumulated resentment. Watching me build a life she had decided, somewhere in the private architecture of her own thinking, that she deserved to be part of. Not grief for what she had lost, she had never had it to lose. Something else. Something that had grown in the dark of its own unchecked logic into something I do not have the right clinical vocabulary to name precisely. I sat with those summaries for a long time after Felicity finished presenting them. Then I asked her what came next. Lured Vane pleaded guilty to first-degree murder in February of 2026. The plea was part of an agreement negotiated by her attorney that removed the possibility of the death penalty in exchange for a full allocution. A formal, on-the-record admission of what she had done and why, delivered in open court. I was present in the courtroom. I also delivered a victim impact statement. I am not going to reproduce it here in full because I said certain things in that room that I said specifically for that room and for one particular person sitting 20 feet away from me, and they belong there. But I will tell you the shape of it. I did not stand at that podium to perform grief. Catherine did not need me to perform anything for anyone. She needed, when she was alive, exactly what she always had from me: honesty without theater. I tried to give her that one last time in the only setting available. What I told the courtroom was this: that the thing Lured had destroyed in March of 1999 was not just a life, though it was that. It was not just a marriage, though it was that too. It was a specific and irreplaceable quality of attention that Catherine brought to the world. The way she noticed things, the way she found the particular beauty inside ordinary moments, the way she could sit in a room with morning light coming through a window and make you feel, just by being present, that the morning was worth the full weight of your attention. That is not something you can inventory. It is not something that shows up in a forensic report or a legal document or a database match. It is the thing that was actually taken, and no courtroom and no guilty plea and no sentence makes it untaken. I said that. Then I sat down. Lured received a sentence of life without the possibility of parole. She did not look at me during the statement. She looked at the table in front of her. I do not know what that means, and I have stopped trying to decide. April 14th, 2026. The date would have been our 30th wedding anniversary. I drove to the Caldwell Arms in the morning. Arlo Fitch's daughter Simone, who had managed the building since 2019 and who had honored her father's agreement with the same quiet decency he had shown me for 18 years before her, met me in the lobby and shook my hand and said she was glad it had ended the way it had. I told her to thank her father for me when she spoke to him. I took the elevator to the 4th floor. I stood in the hallway outside for C for a moment. Then I put the key in the lock for the last time. The room was exactly as it had always been. The curtains, the furniture, the stain I had long since stopped seeing as a stain, the window above the kitchen that faced the back alley, through which Lured had entered on a night in March 27 years ago, while I sat in a hotel conference room in Seattle with no idea that the specific life I was living was about to end. I walked through the room slowly. I did not rush. I had nowhere else I needed to be and nothing else I needed to do, and this was the last time, and last times deserve their full measure of attention. I looked at each corner, each piece of furniture, each ordinary object that had been sitting in extraordinary suspension for 26 years. I said goodbye to the room the way you say goodbye to something that has held a part of you for so long that you are not entirely sure what you will be without it. Then I walked to the window. I unlatched it. I pushed it open. The morning air came into the room for the first time in 26 years. It was April in Portland, cool and carrying the particular freshness of a city that had just had 2 days of rain. It moved through the curtains Catherine had chosen from a Sunday market, the ones the color of late summer, and for just a moment the room felt like something other than a frozen thing. I stood at the open window for a while. Then I closed it and I walked to the kitchen counter, and I set the key down and I walked out. I did not look back. I closed the door behind me. I stood in the hallway outside for C for a moment, the way I had stood outside it on the first day of every month for 26 years. The hallway was quiet. The building had the particular mid-morning stillness of a place where most people have already left for the day. Then I walked to the elevator. I pressed the button. I waited. Catherine always said the light in that apartment in the mornings was something you could live inside. She was right. I just needed, finally, to find a different window.